So welcome to session 2 of our Demystifying Trust-Based Philanthropy series. The session title is called, Does Unrestricted Funding Automatically Make a Funder Trust-Based? So excited to dig into this topic with you all and with these amazing speakers we have slated for today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Shantia Spord. I'm the Director of Programs here at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. For a visual descriptor, I am a Black woman with a lucky red lip on. I've seen some people in the chat shouting it out, with curly hair, and I'm sitting in front of a white wall with some degrees and some floral artwork on it. So that's who I am. And for a land acknowledgement, I greet you from Lene Lenape Native Land, which is currently known as Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So if we have any Philly people in the house, hello, nice to see you all. So that is my introduction, and we are going to jump right in right after a little bit of housekeeping. We ask, of course, that you keep your microphones muted so as not to interrupt the speakers or distract anybody. Please use the chat box for questions, comments, dialogue. We know last time the chat box was just going off, and we encourage that engagement again. I know it can be overwhelming for some, so feel free to, disregard unless you have any questions. But for those of you that love the chat, we love to see you in there. So please do feel free to jump in, and the staff are here to support you and answer any questions. If you need any technical assistance or anything like that, we're also happy to help with that. We ask, of course, that you ensure you're using the most recent version of Zoom. That will be helpful when we have our discussions and just for any capability issues. As far as accessibility, live transcription is available for this event. To enable live captioning, please navigate to the meetings control toolbar and click the show captions icon. Again, if you need any support with that, feel free to reach out to me or my colleague Danielle or any staff members. The session will be recorded, as we've already acknowledged, and we will be publishing it publicly on our website, so you will have access to that if you have to step out or if you miss anything. And of course, we encourage you to join us on socials. Please feel free to jump in, tweet. You can use the hashtag Demystifying TBP if you want to share anything on LinkedIn. We're also happy to see that and encourage you in your social media journey. So yes, please join us in that. And of course, I've got to give a big shout out to the TBP team. We're all here, happy to support you in anything you may need. If you have any questions, if you need anything, please reach out to us. And yeah, and it's an all team effort to put on this program. And so just deep gratitude to the team for all that you all are doing. So. To jump into the series outline, as you all know, Demystifying TBP is a full series. So if you missed the first session, we do have that one posted on our website, on YouTube, the recording. So feel free to check that out. That one was on does trust-based philanthropy mean unconditional trust? And just as a reminder or an announcement to those of you that didn't make the first session, this series is reflective of common questions that we get from you all. We hear you, we understand that there are there's some nuance to trust-based philanthropy, to doing this work. And so we wanted to offer you space to get the clarification that you need, to have discussions with your colleagues, with peers on what it is, what it isn't, and just to get some clarity on trust-based philanthropy. And so the series outline is reflective of the common questions that we get from you all. So hopefully that resonates for you. And my watch is talking to me. So yeah, hopefully that resonates for you. And as we're going through, it can help you to answer these questions yourself that you've had about the series. So today we'll be talking about unrestricted funding. One of the questions we get is, does it automatically make a funder trust-based? So if I'm doing unrestricted funding, I'm trust-based, right? I'm doing the practice. And so we'll kind of get into that. shed some light on what that means, what it doesn't mean, how you can be trust-based, how you can understand how to implement unrestricted and multi-year funding in an equitable and trust-based way. And of course, check out these other sessions we have coming up. We've got some exciting topics. We know we've already had questions about topics such as due diligence and grantee accountability, learning and evaluation, and even the correlation between racial equity and trust-based philanthropy. And so we'll be talking about all of these things in upcoming sessions. I hope you have them on your calendars. And if not, be sure to do that. I'm sure somebody's already put it in the chat. I don't have the chat open right now, but I know the team is on it. So yes, make sure you check these out. So yeah. And so for today's agenda, we're starting with the opening, of course, and you'll get a little bit of grounding context from Shadi, who'll answer this question and give you some key points around it. And then we're going to invite our panelists to come up and to share some from their experiences, from their areas of expertise. And then we're going to have breakout discussions. We have some lovely PSO partners. PSO is philanthropy serving organizations, for those of you that aren't familiar. And these are our partner organizations that a lot of you have heard about this event from them. So we just have deep gratitude for everything that they're doing to share the word and to partner in this learning series with us. And so you'll have the opportunity to connect with them, to connect with your peers. Most of them are regional, so to connect with your peers that are in the same areas as you. And also as a note, these are open. So maybe you're not a member of this PSO, but maybe you want to connect with folks that are in the area, maybe even see about joining that PSO. So these are open, they're not invite only. So please feel free to join. So we'll have that at the end. And then finally, I'd love to introduce our amazing, amazing speakers. You're in for a real treat with each of these speakers, TBP champions. We have Maylee Walker, the Executive Director at the Clinneal Foundation. We have John Brothers, the President at the T. Rowe Price Foundation. And we have Carrie Avery, the President at Durfee Foundation. And they all will be sharing their expertise, their experiences in unrestricted funding, and their insights in general. So thank you so much, panelists, for your time and your insights, and we're so glad you could be here with us today. And I already mentioned our lovely philanthropic serving organization partners, but just deep gratitude to you all for your partnership. Again, take a look at the list of partners. At the end, you'll have the opportunity to join a PSO session or a breakout. And you'll be able to discuss what you're hearing, what you're learning. You'll have the opportunity for a smaller group discussion. So please stick on for that and be prepared to share and learn together. So I want to open it up just with a little bit of grounding and to see where everybody's situated in the room. So we have a short 2-question poll. And one question is around where you are at in your trust-based philanthropy journey. We know people are coming from different levels, different areas. Some of you may have never heard of TBP before. And some of you may be all the way on the other side of the spectrum and you've been in this work doing it for a while now. And maybe some of you heard about it, you learned about it, and you're like, I'm curious. I want to hear a little bit more about that. So please do drop in where you're at in this journey. It's going to help us as we're tailoring our content to who's in the room and understanding what would be most helpful for you all to know. And then the second question, how confident are you that you can answer the question? Does unrestricted funding automatically make a funder trust-based? So we know people are coming again at different levels. Some of you are like, I have no idea how to answer that. Of course, this is not just a simple yes or no question. I mean, you could answer yes or no, but there's a lot more to that or else we wouldn't have a 2-hour session here. So yeah, maybe you can answer it on a really blanketed level, but to really get into the nuance, the details, the information you need to know, maybe you don't have that. So maybe that's why you're here. So yeah, see, it looks like it's slowing down on the poll answer. So I will go ahead and end this and share the results. It looks like we've got a good balance. Okay, about 30% across the board are in the initial stages, about 30% are researching and implementing a few changes, about 30% have made various shifts. So awesome, we've got a good balance here. And then shout out to those that are new to hearing about TBP. We're glad to have you, and also shout out to the champions. And then as far as the second question, we've got a pretty good bell curve where most people are somewhat confident, but could use more clarity. So we're excited to have you here to gain just that. So I will stop sharing these results. And thank you all for your participation there. And I'm going to speed right through this because we did see that most people aren't new to trust-based philanthropy. And I encourage you, if you are completely new, we have a ton of resources. I'm sure people are in the chat right now dropping resources, and we will continue to do that as the session goes on. But this is just meant to be kind of a grounding piece for people to come in and to understand what trust-based philanthropy is and what it isn't. And what it really gets to is the power imbalance that we see in the sector. In the philanthropic sector, we have a power imbalance between funders and fund seekers, grantees, potential grantees. And so trust-based philanthropy really encourages us, primarily funders, to really look at the ways to redistribute power to those that are doing the work, that need the support of funders. And so this work really gets at building those strong, transparent relationships with your grantee partners so that you can redistribute the power and so that you can lift up more equitable, meaningful relationships with your grantees. And a lot of you filled out our survey, and one of the main things we found is that people really adopt this practice because they feel like it's the right thing to do. And it is, it's the right thing to do to really lift up equity, lift up equitable practices in the ways that you're engaging with your grantee partners. So I'm not going to read all of this, but again, if you need more information on, base level, what trust-based philanthropy is, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to check out the website. And we encourage you to start with your values. Start with your organizational values and your personal values. This is a values-based approach, and we encourage you to operate from your values and to really think about and understand where you may not be, the actions you have may not be aligned with the values that you and your organization have. And so these are trust-based values that we've adopted, that we're centering in our work. And I'm not going to go through these for the sake of time. We want to get straight to the speakers, but just for you to encourage you to think about how you may align with these values and how to ensure that your organizational values are aligned with the work that you're doing and the places you want to go in your work. So there are 4 dimensions of trust-based philanthropy that we encourage funders to really dig into. Oftentimes we go straight to the practices and we say, all right, this is nice. How can we implement this? What's the checklist? What are the things we need to do? And that's part of what we'll be talking about now, but we just want to encourage you all to really think about trust-based philanthropy across all of the dimensions. So looking at your organizational culture, your way of being, how you show up internally, looking at the structures, the systems, the technologies, the protocols that your organization is carrying out, and how to be more trusting and trust-based in those things as well. And then of course, the leadership. We really encourage you to think about how to lift up trust-based leadership. We encourage leaders to really dig into this work themselves, and to understand it has to come from leadership as well. So, and of course, values should be embedded across all of these different dimensions of trust-based philanthropy. So I'll talk a little bit about the practices here because we are starting to dig into the practices even with this session. And I'll just give a little bit of a grounding on unrestricted funding, multi-year unrestricted funding, one of our trust-based practices, because this really gets to trusting your grantees enough to know they know what they need to do with the money, with the funding. And so saying I'm going to give you multiple years of unrestricted funding, knowing that you know where to put the funding, where you need it, is a trust-based practice. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because we have some lovely speakers that are going to talk more about that. Other practices include doing the homework. As funders, what are the ways you can proactively find out information, get what you need about your grantee partners without asking them for it? We talk a lot about reducing grantee burden. There are a lot of things as funders we ask grantees for that we don't use, that we don't need to make decisions. And so doing the homework and simplifying and streamlining paperwork are about that, are about reducing the grantee burden and about funders taking on some of the onus of that burden to do the work that we need to do to so that grantees can really just focus on the impactful work that they're doing. Being transparent and responsive is a key way to build strong relationships. Oftentimes, there are so many things that grant seekers don't know about their foundations, about their funders. And if you're not in the philanthropic sector, if you're not in the field, there are just so many unanswered questions, and they spend a lot of time and energy digging to try to find out and to figure it out. And so we encourage funders to be transparent about a lot of different things and to be responsive. And that's one way to really build strong relationships with your grantees and to right-size that power dynamic. Also soliciting and acting on feedback and making sure it's not explicitly tied to your grant award. So having options for anonymous feedback, having options outside of your grant cycle for feedback so that grantees can tell you what's going on, how it's sitting for them, ways that you can be a better partner to them. And then offering support beyond the check. It's a great practice for you all to think about as you're thinking about ways to additionally support your grantees, whether that's connecting them with other funders, connecting them with other nonprofits that are doing similar work, or maybe that are doing a great job at something that maybe your grantee needs a little bit more support and help with. Or offering sabbatical grants or wellness grants or things like that. You'll hear a little bit more about that later on. So there are just so many ways. It's about building those strong relationships with your grantee partners so that you can know the ways outside of just writing the check to continue to support them. So those are the practices, again, just meant to be a really brief overview before we dig into the session. So with that, I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Shadi, who is going to take us in some grounding context, really getting into this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that grounding and introduction, Shantias, and good day, everyone. It is so wonderful to be with all 436 of you today. So my name is Shadi Salehi. I am the Executive Director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. I'm an Iranian woman with long brown hair and a black shirt, and I have some art and a kind of spiky plant behind me in the background, joining you from unceded Ohlone land, also known as San Francisco, California. Okay, so does unrestricted funding automatically make a funder trust-based? And as you heard, hopefully, in Shantias's overview, unrestricted funding is one key component of a holistic trust-based philanthropy approach. Next slide, please. And so before we get into it, I wanted to make a note on terminology. We at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project often refer to unrestricted funding. This terminology can also be referred to as general operating support, core support, flexible funding. These are other phrases that are often used to speak to kind of the same general concept of giving nonprofits the flexibility to self-determine how they allocate their grant funds. So as we talk about unrestricted funding today, you might hear it being interchangeably used with some of these other phrases, but the main idea is really about thinking about the role of philanthropy and how we can support and bolster organizations to achieve their intended mission, to achieve their intended impact, and trusting them in making those decisions and how they're allocating those grant funds. So what we're talking about is a shift away from what is really kind of has become the norm in a lot of grant making around project restricted funding. So we're here to talk about why unrestricted funding is such a valuable practice, but also what does it come along with in the greater package of a trust-based philanthropy approach. Next slide, please. So as we've mentioned, unrestricted funding is just one part of a holistic trust-based approach. It is one of the core and key cornerstone practices of a trust-based approach for some of the reasons we've already shared. But it's also important to mention there is a kind of collection of practices that really are part of embodying what makes a trust-based funder. So part of this means that it's even if an unrestricted grant is being given out, how can we actually think more holistically about the role of philanthropy in supporting, bolstering organizations to be their best and do their best and have as much kind of to reach their greatest potential and reaching their intended impact. Next slide, please. So this also connects to this bigger notion of trust-based philanthropy is an ethos more than it is a checklist. And what we mean by this is kind of goes back to some of those values that Shanti has shared, is this idea that practicing in this way is about how we come into these grantee relationships with an awareness of the inherent power imbalance and with an intention to partner in a spirit of service to the leaders who are doing the work on the ground. So that ethos, that sensibility of recognizing, putting ourselves in the shoes of those who are doing that work day in and day out, thinking about kind of the power imbalance and acknowledging that power imbalance and recognizing the role of philanthropy in helping alleviate some of those power imbalances so that organizations can achieve their intended impact. That ethos goes well beyond what we do in grant-making practices. It goes into every interaction, every conversation, even within our structures, kind of thinking about how we can re-examine the structure, the grant-making structures, so that it can embody that ethos of, we are here to support you, the organizational leaders on the ground doing this work. We are here to support you in achieving your goals. And so that ethos is kind of omnipresent, and you'll hear it in the conversation in just a minute, in how we can approach trust-based philanthropy. And so for this reason, even if unrestricted funding is dispersed if it's dispersed without this ethos in mind, it could actually not necessarily contribute toward building trust. It may not necessarily be considered trust-based. So we're going to unpack this a little bit. Next slide, please. So unrestricted funding does not make you automatically trust-based, but it's still important. And I have a little animation here if you click the next button. Wait, what does that mean, huh? So here's why. Next slide. So the multi-year unrestricted funding, which is really where we emphasize kind of this element of trust-based philanthropy, it really helps unlock possibilities in many, many ways. So this is why we often lead with this as the kind of cornerstone practice of trust-based philanthropy. And when it's practiced alongside all these other practices, it can really contribute not just toward building greater trust over time, but it helps facilitate deeper relationships, deeper learning on the funder side, and it has all sorts of benefits on the nonprofit side. First and foremost, multi-year unrestricted funding acknowledges that the work that nonprofits do is long-term and it's unpredictable. And we operate in an unpredictable society, in an unpredictable world. So just at its basis level, multi-year unrestricted funding gives nonprofits space to dream, innovate, and respond to emergent needs. It also allows nonprofits to cover those costs that are very rarely covered by project grants, such as rent, utilities, operations, even staff that don't have a specific project role but are critical to the operations of the organization. And so when we are, defaulting to project grants, it requires nonprofits to cobble together all these different project grants in order to meet their basic needs. And that distracts a lot of their time and energy away from their mission so that they can just keep the lights on and keep their staff employed. It also aids in staff retention. It allows for nonprofits to create space for staff to stay in their roles, to grow in their roles. It allows them to plan for that. And staff retention is such a key element of being able for healthy organizations to thrive and do well. And that's why it's part of supporting that health and strength of organizations. And it can really shift nonprofits away from a scarcity mindset. So many of the traditional conventional structures in philanthropy force nonprofits into a scarcity mindset where they're cobbling together funds, having to penny pinch, having to squeeze out as much as possible from these project grants. It can give nonprofits the space to think in the terms of abundance and be able to plan and dream and really innovate in ways that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And then on both sides, both for funders and nonprofits, it creates the conditions for a bigger picture learning and evaluation, where funders can have longer term relationships, can understand the work that nonprofits do in a more holistic way. So that also yields a lot of benefits that can inform grant making strategy, can help funders be more strategic and intentional and aware of the many variables that nonprofits are going through and experiencing in achieving their intended impact. So this truly multi-year unrestricted funding unlocks possibilities. And we're going to hear shortly about some examples of how that can be possible. Next slide, please. A question that we often get is this legal? What are the legal requirements? Unrestricted funding is totally consistent with the legal requirements. In fact, there are no legal requirements at all for foundations to restrict grants to specific projects. So this is something just to kind of alleviate some of those concerns. A lot of questions come up around risk and, is this the right way to go? What are we required to do? So just know that there's no legal requirement for restricted grants. And we have a wonderful legal guide that we developed with a nonprofit attorney that breaks down a lot of the common legal questions that we get about both unrestricted funding and trust-based philanthropy practices. So you can check that out in the chat. Next slide. All right, let's get into it. So I am delighted to bring up our colleagues here, Mei Lee Walker, the Executive Director of the Clinial Foundation, Carrie Avery, the President of the Durfee Foundation, and John Brothers, the President of the T. Rowe Price Foundation. Thank you all for being here. This is why everyone's here, to hear from you. So thanks for sitting patiently and being here to share your stories. So first, I want to just kind of start it out and just invite just a brief reflection from all three of you. How would you answer this question? Does unrestricted funding automatically make a funder trust-based? And we'll start with you, Carrie, and then I'll go around.
My answer is no.
I
can go on and I'll elaborate further, but simply no.
And John, how would you answer that question?
Well, I would say it's a good step, but also agree with Carrie that it's no. For me, it's the equivalent of, if I eat an apple today, does that make me healthy? Right? Or every January 2nd, if I commit myself to a bunch of salads and working out crazily, does that make me healthy? No, it's a good step for sure. But trust-based is a journey that you're always on, and you're always trying to figure out how do you create an environment where you and the folks that you're fortunate enough to work with have relationship that's on an equal level. And so that's an ongoing movement, not as you said, a checklist where you say, okay, I've done all these 6 things, therefore I am healthy.
Very well put. Thank you, John. Mei Lee, anything to add?
No, I'd also say no. And John, I was waiting for your analogies because I love them. So I think you said it the best compared to the rest of us. So I would agree with both of them.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get into the real substance of this. And this we want to kind of hear from all three of you, because you have operationalized unrestricted funding, multi-year unrestricted funding in your work. And you represent different types of foundations and different grant-making portfolios. So we thought it would be really instructive for everyone to hear these different contexts of how this manifests, because it doesn't look identical across organizations, nor should it look identical across organizations, because it's really about that ethos of being very intentional about how you apply these values to the focus of your grant-making. So let's start with you, Carrie. Can you share just more about the context of the Durfee Foundation and how you as a foundation have embraced unrestricted funding, and why? Why has that been kind of an approach in your grant making?
Sure. Well, I'll give a little bit of background about Durfee. We are a family foundation. We were founded in 1960, so we've been around for 63 years at this point. We give away a little over $2 million a year. So we're, not big, but not tiny. We have 5 staff. We focus on Los Angeles County. And we focus most specifically on supporting people who work in the nonprofit and change sectors. And so the way that that looks is that we have, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of our more restricted grant making that we do that we feel is within the spirit of trust-based philanthropy. We have a sabbatical program for nonprofit leaders that we've been running for 26 years now, where we make grants to executive directors of nonprofits to enable them to take a 3-month break from work. And we work with the organization to make sure that things operate smoothly while they're gone and when they return. We have a Stanton Fellowship program that's a little bit more involved. Go to our website to take a look at that. We have the LARC Awards that we launched last year, which are $30,000 grants to smaller community-based nonprofits to fund the collective care of all of the staff at their organizations. And then in the unrestricted grants portfolio, we have our Springboard program that is for newer organizations. Some of them are nonprofits, some of them are not nonprofits. We give them, at the beginning, we give them 2 years of funding, $35,000 a year, plus the paid support of a mentor and an alum from our sabbatical program who works closely with them over a minimum, 50 hours a year. And that is unrestricted funding to newer organizations. I'll stop there.
On my Xbox 360.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So Maylee and John, you both represent foundations that have actually transitioned from previously project restricted grants to unrestricted grants. And you both were instrumental in making that shift and transition happen. So John, first, let's start with you. If you can share some of that context of T. Rowe Price Foundation, what the focus area is, and how and why did you make that transition from predominantly project restricted to unrestricted?
Sure. Thank you so much. And for folks that don't know T. Rowe Price, so T. Rowe Price is a global financial services firm, and I lead a lot of the social good activity that comes from T. Rowe Price, including philanthropy and a donor advised funds and a number of other areas. And so we do a series of different things, including grant making, but also in addition to grant making. And I came to Baltimore in April of 2015, and most folks that are outside of Baltimore don't know that that month is actually a hugely influential month in Baltimore. I started the week of unrest that the world was watching. And, I'm a former community organizer who now is in corporate philanthropy, which is an interesting path, I'm sure, but started to notice, part of that work was to walk into communities that were affected by the unrest and just kind of listen, which is a staple of community organizing. It's just listening to what community is saying. And, T. Rowe was like, well, what should we do, John? We have to get involved. And my response was, there isn't anybody in central West Baltimore saying, I can't wait for T. Rowe to be here. And so our job was to just really listen to what community was saying. And what we heard more than anything was the how of our anchor institutions have actually done real damage in communities, including philanthropy, who by their practices, by the way they walked into community, all different aspects of the way in which philanthropy wants to come into community was actually many times really damaging. And so unrestricted was one of a number of areas that community had cited. Don't you trust us enough to spend the money? We are experts in our own community. Why do you why are you pointing money towards program when in fact our organizations are really unhealthy? And we were a major part of the reasons for doing that. And we're, most corporate groups are confetti funders. They spread it, around far and wide. And out of that, they wanted to be good. We want to be good citizens. But that is not ultimately a very effective way of doing work in community. And so we stopped, we said, is there any proof to us that shows that giving program dollars actually has better program outcomes? And we couldn't find any. And so when we went to our board and made those changes, there certainly was a furrowed brow. And so I'll talk more about that later, but ultimately that's what we heard from community is like a lot of the apparatus that philanthropy had set up to was actually really challenging to community life.
Thanks so much for sharing that and for reminding us that these calls for unrestricted funding have been coming from the nonprofit sector for decades, and yet it is still not the norm. And so you all are demonstrating that you can do this way. It's more impactful, and the sky doesn't fall through when you do it. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that journey. We'll be back to learn more about the process. Maylee, you're here representing a family foundation, and different from Carrie and John, your work is not place-based. It's not focused on one specific community. And however, similar to John, you have moved your foundation from what used to be mostly project restricted to multi-year unrestricted. So share with us a little bit of that context of your foundation, the focus, and what that journey looked like.
Great, thank you for having me. So I'm at the Clenille Foundation, which is on the Lenni Lenape land, otherwise known as Philadelphia. And we're small, so we grant around $3 to $4 million a year. We have 3 full-time staff, 1 part-time staff. And a big mission of our foundation is both to serve the community and also it's a family foundation to involve the family. And so we have about 20 to 25 family members really involved in the foundation. They themselves stay pretty private, but that's a big part. All our grants are all committee decided, committee driven, and so that also impacts how we do our grant making practices. As of today, in our competitive grant programs, of which we have 3, our geography is the New England Mid-Atlantic area with early stage organizations. We have a grant program in the Philadelphia area on organizations rooted in community. And then we also have a grant program for past grantee partners that are making significant organizational change based on feedback from the communities that they serve. And I started there 15 years ago. So we were not completely general operating funding at all. It was a lot of project-based funding. And after about 5 years, I realized that we as staff, we packaged our grants really, really well for the board. And we made it seem that every grant was relational when they weren't. And so we realized of the 150 to 200 grants that we were making, maybe we had strong relationships with a handful of those organizations. And so we were very honest with the board to say, hey, if you want transactional grant making, we can do it, but we can't do it with this many organizations. And so that's when our board said, really? You don't have good relationships with 150 people? We said, no. Oh, sorry, the name of the foundation is the Clenille Foundation. And so our board understood that because they saw themselves as relationship-based and we weren't doing that. So part of it was us to be honest with the board. And I think the other part was we had a lot of project-based funding, which I understand because people want to see a specific issue or they want to see a specific project that they feel that they can relate to. And so what we did is take the approach, which I heard from somebody in the business world. She said, hey, if I have a product, I'm not telling you to leave your old product and try mine. I'm not trying to get you to move away from something. I want to get you to go to something. And it reminded me 20 years ago, I was on bed rest with my first son, and my husband wanted me to get a cell phone. I did not want a cell phone. I love my phone connected to the wall. That's what I wanted. And he said, I'm just going to get it to you. And I couldn't do anything. I was on bed rest. So he gave it to me. And once I had my cell phone and I could call whenever I wanted to, I didn't want to touch the phone that was connected to the wall anymore. So I kind of took that approach with general operating support. And so we did it bit by bit. So in 2012, we had a little bit of general operating support. in 2000, actually back in 2010, we had one grant program that was all general operating support. The other ones were project-based grants. Our board loved that one grant program with general operating support. So I felt like I needed to show them, look, it's not as bad as all the fears that you have. And when they realized they loved that one grant program, it didn't seem as bad to change it, but it took 7 years from that 2010, all general operating support, to 2017 to change it to all our grant programs. So it does take time and it takes patience because, look, I don't like change. And I think as humans, we don't like change. But if our board could see it wasn't as bad as their fears thought it was, and it was actually more enjoyable because they could go deeper, get to know the organizations better, we went through the shift. And I can talk more about that. But it was gradual. It was very intentional. We just kept going at it.
Thank you so much. It's really instructive for you to share that this can be done gradually and the longer term change takes time, and that's totally okay. And sometimes that process of change, and we all know change generally does take time, especially change that's going to take root within our systems and our structures. John, you had referenced that when you brought this to the board, you did have to experience some furrowed brows and some skepticism around unrestricted funding. So what questions came up and how did you work through that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So one is, I work in a financial services firm. And so you have a lot of folks here that have spent a good part of their career looking at Bloomberg terminals with arrows going up and charts and all of this kind of stuff. And so they and then there's this philosophy of that they came into or a bias that they came in that they have to watch groups in this way. And so when we started to move towards this, the first thing we did was analysis, right? And so in that confetti funding style, we had been giving to many of the same groups for 12, 15 years, right? So we were already doing it. So like, why approve them year after year, and why give dollars in this way? Like, so when we started to make the case about multi-year general operating, the general operating question actually was the easiest, because I would say, well, when you make investments in Coca-Cola, are you making investments in Diet Coke or Coca-Cola? And they were like, well, Diet or Coca-Cola. And I was like, of course, like your general business practice of investment would never invest in this way. And so why would we do it any different? And the ethos of the company was client driven. We trust our clients, right? Like, so when you apply the ethos of this company to our grant making, of course, general operating support makes sense. Multi-year, you don't make investments year after year. You don't make investments in product. And it was very easy, right? And I, being new, I said, tell me how program funding, how's that work for you? Like, are we seeing these like miraculous ways of doing of impacts on the ground, right? What we see is we are choking nonprofits. The sector is unhealthy, right? And some of that is due to the practices. And so it became an easy argument to make, both from a philosophy and morally, but from a technical, data-driven perspective as well. We just couldn't prove that the way we were practicing had better impacts and better results. And so it was a fairly easy thing for us to transition. And now we've been in that place since 2016.
Amazing. Thank you. Maylee, you talked a little bit about this also, how you kind of helped address some of the board's concerns by just doing this incrementally. But I'm curious, did you experience kind of similar concerns or questions, or how did you work through some of the hesitance or just questions that came up as you were making these shifts toward unrestricted?
Yeah, so the big shift happened in 2017 when all our grant programs became unrestricted general operating. And I think what helped tip it was myself and our program officer decided that we would ask every organization, like this is going to sound crazy, but we asked every organization during a due diligence call. So this is during a call when they're seeking funding and we're reviewing their proposal. But this is the only time we had to do it. And we don't use a lot of consultants because we have a really slim budget. So I said, okay, we're going to do the best we can. So at the end of this call, when again, these organizations, we read their proposal, we're asking about the proposal, but at the end of the call, we said, okay, Conversation's done. Now, can you just describe those funders who you love in the field? What is it that you love about them? So as a way to get them to critique us, but they weren't talking about us. And again, Shadi, as you said, no surprise, general operating, multi-year support came up over and over again, and we just took notes. By the end of these calls, we had about 3 to 4 pages of direct quotes from organizations who were probably going to fund of what they wanted from us. And it was multi-year general operating, and we literally put those quotes in our board book and said, look, board, this is what they are asking of us. This is what they want. And that was the tipping point for our board to say, yes, we should do that. That's what the field is asking. And that was though after, 6 years of trying some, doing some, but I think it was those quotes and those direct feedback from organizations that said, yeah, we need to do this. This is what they want, and we're hindering them from doing the work.
That's so instructive. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's pretty, it's pretty simple in taking that feedback. I love that approach too of inviting them to share what are the practices that they love from other funders, because it could give them some space to point out things that weren't, that in a more power conscious way, which I think is also key to that ethos of trust-based. So Carrie, coming back to you, Durfee is such a great example of trust-based in many ways because you provide unrestricted funding, and you also have designed some specific grant programs very much like true to that trust-based ethos that could be considered, semi-restricted or more targeted grants. So they're not like these formal unrestricted grants. And we wanted to bring up these examples as a way that you can really embody the spirit of trust-based philanthropy, and it doesn't have to necessarily be tied to an unrestricted grant. So can you share more about, you already previewed some of this, but can you share more about Durfee's more targeted grants and how you've approached those in a kind of with this trust-based ethos?
Sure. So I talked about our sabbatical program and our LARC Awards program. So generally speaking, I'm a huge fan of general operating support, multi-year, all of that, and that's what we do in a lot of our portfolio at Durfee. The one exception in our case is that when it comes to self-care for people who work at nonprofit organizations, we have found that if people are given general operating support, even if you tell them, we really hope that you use some of this for self-care, generally they won't. That people who work in nonprofits are, they are programmed through our broken system to take money and put it into the operations and not necessarily to invest in the people who are doing the work, especially the executive directors of the organizations. And so we launched our sabbatical program in the late 90s, where we it's now a $75,000 grant to the organization. 60,000 of it supports the sabbatical of the executive director to take 3 months leave from work. We also have a consultant who works with the organization to make sure that that people are supported to step up. We provide bonuses for the folks who step into interim roles while the executive director is gone. And part of the trust-based part of sabbatical is we don't have a plan for what people do on their sabbatical. We tell them, we don't know what is going to be revitalizing, rejuvenating to you. We just want you to replenish yourself. And so you design the sabbatical that will do that for you. And for some people, it's spending time with their family. For some people, it's spending time away from their family. And it depends on, what they want to do. And so, and then our reporting requirements are, we tell them all we want to know, other than sort of the very basic financial reporting, all we want to know is what it's sort of a letter from you, like what I did on my summer vacation kind of letter, like tell us what you did. But we don't expect a huge amount of reporting back. So that's so it's, we definitely try to operate in that trust-based spirit. But I also want to highlight that, there was a time when I felt like, oh, we're not really trust-based because this is a restricted grant. But I do think in thinking about it, that there are ways to do programmatic funding, but very few ways. I would say there aren't that many exceptions, but I do think when it comes to self-care and prioritizing self-care, that is it's good for a funder to send the message that this is really important to us and we really want you to spend the money in this way.
These are such great examples, and just reminds us that it's not an all or nothing approach. It's really about kind of being responsive, approaching, listening to the needs, being aware, and also recognizing that, even with unrestricted funding, nonprofit leaders often are trying to optimize that funding for their staff, for the mission, and aren't necessarily thinking about, I'm just going to carve this out for my own sabbatical, because many leaders who run these organizations are thinking about their teams, their mission, their community. Mei Lee, you also observed something similar with your grantees at the Clinio Foundation, and came up with the idea of a kind of programmatic grant to meet that need. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we found the same thing that Carrie did with our one grant program that was at that time the only multi-year general operating grant program, and the EDs were telling us the same thing. We are exhausted, and there was only one ED out of all of them that said he felt comfortable using it for himself. Everybody didn't. So we've also tagged along $10,000 for professional development, and this year was professional development. And we noticed some EDs wanting to use it for therapy. And so now we've shifted it to professional development and wellness. And initially it was just for that one grant program in 2015. And then 2022, I think with the awareness with COVID and all the mental health issues we all were facing, now we add that to every single grant that we award. So we've done the same thing as well.
Amazing. We are getting some really great questions. So I want to dig into some of this, and please keep your questions coming. We'll do our best to bring them into the discussion as much as we can. So I want to dig into this notion of multi-year unrestricted funding, because while we are seeing some shifts in funders adopting unrestricted funding, it seems to be that it's landing within one particular program area, and it's not necessarily translating to multi-year funding. In fact, in our recent survey of grant makers, we found that the uptake on multi-year funding was the lowest uptake among all the other trust-based practices. So we know this is a sticking point. We know we're getting questions about this already. So let's talk about one, just kind of how you've operationalized it. So John, would love to just hear from you to speak to how you have at T. Rowe Price Foundation operationalized multi-year funding, and how have you considered making space for new prospective partnerships? Because there's always this concern that multi-year funding is going to just tie up all your commitments and it won't make room for new relationships. So how have you thought about that as you've operationalized this at T. Rowe Price?
Yeah, so we have created several different funds in our grant making portfolio. So we have, to the latter end of your question, a new grants fund. That is, for us about, we do over 1,000 meetings in community a year. So we really do wear our shoe leather out on trying to see what's out there and listen to what community is saying, and saying, hey, there's a really great effort over here. We are often, for many groups, first-time funders, never received a grant before. We have several initiatives where we help incubate on that level, but we have a new relationship effort. And so that will allow us to say, hey, we're going to fund you this year and get to know you and things like that. That's a small section of our overall budget, but it is a place where we, when I met my wife, I had to, we didn't get married on the first date, right? We had to get to know each other for a really long time. And so for us, for this, it's getting to know each other, and that's that fund. Our citizenship portfolio is the one in which that is a 3-year grant cycle. And when we started doing that, we did it in tiers, right? To get everyone eventually to this multi-year place. And so 93% of our funding is multi-year. We have what we call impact grants. Those are 4 to 5 year funding commitments. But because of those different funds, they do different things for us in community. The goal is, we also provide a lot of different other things. We have 2,500 partnerships, and only 250 of them receive a grant from us. So we get a lot of if someone's using our technical assistance, that's the equivalent of a $25,000 grant, right? It's really good. We're working with them to get them stronger in a variety of ways that the community is determined. But in our grant making, we have several different funds that try to serve very specific purposes in community life.
I love how you responded to that question, because you're reiterating and reinforcing that these practices are all complementary. So even if you can't necessarily, fund every single organization that comes through the door, you can provide support beyond the check in the form of the capacity building supports that you all provide. And also thinking creatively, again, reminding us that it's not an all or nothing, one size fits all. You can actually preserve part of your budget for, responsive needs or new opportunities. So thank you for sharing that. Maylee, you too have thought about your budgeting in a way that can account for market fluctuations, because sometimes it is market fluctuations that can be seen as like a roadblock to establish, like kind of committing to multi-year, because hey, year to year, we don't know how much money we're going to have to work with here. So how have you addressed that particular question at Clinial Foundation?
And I can also address, I saw in the chat, somebody said, how do you convince your board? I think one of the ways that our board approved it is we said, look, we can't have relationships with 150 organizations with our tiny staff. And so by multi-year, now we have about 60 grantee partners. It was very hard. So there is a loss to decide, and that was an important process of how do you break that down. But our board did say we wanted relationship-based grant making, and we could do it with 60. We couldn't do it with 150. So that was part of their yes. In terms of budgeting, even though we had been doing multi-year general operating support since 2017, all of a sudden last year I realized every year I felt like we had this, what are we going to do? We either had too much money or too little money. And every year it felt like a crisis, even though it wasn't. I thought the only thing that's going to stay the same is the market. I mean, what year is the market going to go flat? It's not. And so I worked with a couple of our finance committee members, and we do have some discretionary funds, which makes this possible and easy as a family foundation. And so we created levers. And so we have strong market levers and weak market levers, because we know the market is going to be up or down every year, even if we use a 3-year rolling average, which we do. And so they agreed, for example, strong market levers, that the first thing we would do is increase the number of grants in our existing grant portfolio up to a certain extent. And the weak market levers, so if the market goes down, we do have a discretionary fund called the Field Building Grant, which supports efforts, so it's discretionary, supports efforts beyond just organizations, but efforts that really support the broader field, like organizing or coalition building that's hard to get funding for. And many times we support that work maybe that our grantee partners are doing. But they agreed that if the market goes down, that fund will go down. So it could be 0 next year, or it could be 200,000, but at least we have these levers that help to protect our competitive grant programs and that multi-year support. We're 2 years in, so far so good, but that is what we've decided to do. And in past years, we have taken beyond the 5% when our board felt like it should go to the community. So that's another lever that's not in this framework, but that our board has done in the past as well.
Thank you so much. That is such a great offering for folks to think creatively and be prepared, and also be able to still commit to the multi-year unrestricted funding. Carrie, I want to move to you next and lift up Durfee Foundation's Springboard Fund, because it's a dedicated 2-year unrestricted grant for emergent organizations that are younger organizations under 5 years old. And I love this example because Durfee has expressed a commitment to supporting early stage organizations before they've necessarily had that proof of concept time. And oftentimes, many foundations that want to embrace unrestricted funding are hesitant to do it for early organizations that maybe haven't been around that long, don't have that much history. So can you speak to why Durfee established this program and how you think about risk in this context? Like, how do you think about it? How do you do your homework? How do you, pay attention to the relationship to make sure it's all working out as you expect?
Sure. So we've been doing this program. We had like an earlier phase of this program that was that we started in the 80s and then revised it to where it is now about 15 years ago. And, you know, as a smaller family foundation, we're always looking for where can we really make a difference. And one area that we can really make a difference in Los Angeles is that I think we're really the only funder that funds across issue areas for emergent organizations. And that's something that appeals to our board as to really, you know, think about where do we add value? It's in being in this space. And when it comes to risk assessment, I often think that philanthropy poses this question in a completely backwards way. It's like, well, what about the risk? It's like, well, our risk is we're supposed to give away money. So, you know, the money's going out the door no matter what, because that is our job. And what's the worst possible downside risk? It's, you know, it's criminal malfeasance or embezzlement, or maybe just that the money isn't spent in the way that we think is the most appropriate way. I've been in this work for 30 years. I have never seen this happen under my watch. And it's because I believe that, you know, from my experience, when you extend trust and you do it not blindly, you do it very advisedly, you receive trust. And so even though we're funding, you know, new organizations, very grassroots, very community-based, people who care very much about, you know, their community and the issue that they're working on, they usually don't know anything about starting an organization, but that's what we want to help them with. And so that is a risk well worth taking. I mean, when you think about risk, the people who are really taking risks are the people who are running nonprofit organizations, the people who are trying to get grants every year, the people who have to hire folks and not know if they're going to have to lay them off the following year because their funding doesn't come through. So let's all, you know, in philanthropy, let's have a little sense of perspective about what risk really is. And I would encourage people to think a little bit more broadly about where they place their risks. And it's the upside is tremendous. You know, right now we're working with an organization called People's Pottery Project that was started by 2 formerly incarcerated women who are potters. They got a studio space. They're working with other formerly incarcerated women and non-binary people to teach them pottery. They're selling their products to restaurants, to gift stores, and it's been challenging for sure, but wow, I mean, the impact of that is tremendous.
What an awesome example. And we will be doing a whole session on reframing risk. So we hope you all join us for that later on in this series. John, I want to bring a question to you that came in, an anonymous question that came in. And we do often get this question when it comes to unrestricted funding. And it's regarding when you give an unrestricted grant to an organization that maybe does a bunch of different things, but you're focused on a particular issue. How do you think about that? How do you make sure the money is used for the issue and doesn't just get absorbed in the overall mission of the organization? Like, how do you think about that at T. Rowe Price?
Yeah, I mean, again, our view is, there are a couple of views we have. Number one is that the organization and their leader are the experts in their work, right? They know their neighbors by name. And when they're coming to us, they represent hundreds, if not thousands, of their community members and are advocating on behalf of those members to make the life of those members better, right? So we take that as sacred, and that's really important. And so it is not our job to like walk into their home, ask them to step on a scale or to do something and to be different to what we want and what we need. So that's the first thing, is just how our first step as we we have the good fortune to be able to walk into their community, that we have to be led by their self-determination, and their self-determination is determined by them. That is self-determination. It's not our job to mix into that, but is to understand that, one, and then two, to be able to figure out. Now, for me, I represent a company, right? And what I know is Baltimore, as an example, is a city that struggles with infrastructure. And that is something that companies have in abundance. And so it is my job to do, with that first step, to try to figure out, how do I use the apparatus of a company, whether it's grant making or otherwise, to benefit the work that they do. The second is we care about program health, but it is secondary to what we care about in terms of organizational health, right? And that is more important to us. We want strong leaders, strong organizations, and strong networks. And that's what we wake up to every day trying to work on. So like Carrie, we look at funding across, not down, because we know that leaders, organizations, and networks are across areas, right? And so we concentrate every day on organizational health, and we have all tools and funding and resources to make sure that every day the leaders and organizations that represent those communities can get stronger every day. And so that's our focus. It's not our job to get involved. Now, if they want to express program outcomes, and most of these organizations don't have R&D departments, right? They don't have those resources. Our job is to help them be better learners and to give them resources to do that from an organizational capacity standpoint. Our job is not to be in the program mix, watching and determining what those program outcomes should be, but helping them be stronger enough to do that if they so care about that.
Thank you so much. I think part of what you're speaking to is just this philosophy of how you understand the role of your foundation in contributing to the change you see, and understanding that it's about healthy organizations are what bring about impact. I'm curious if Mei Lee or Carrie, do you want to offer any additional insights on this particular question?
Not right now. That was all
great. Good. Okay. Well put by John Brothers. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a real a hot topic, which we have a whole dedicated program coming up on July 12th on how to think about evaluation and impact in a trust-based context. But I want to bring it in because oftentimes when we're talking about unrestricted funding, sometimes the question is, well, how do you measure the impact of an unrestricted grant? If it's not tied to a program, what are we assessing? How do we know the money is making a difference? What do we share back with the board about what's happening and what we're accomplishing or what we're contributing to? So I know all three of you have thought about this question. Some of you have already alluded to a little bit of how you've thought about it. But I'm opening the floor for you all to kind of share some of your thoughts on how you think about it, especially with regards to what the board wants to know in terms of your impact as a foundation.
I'm happy to speak to it. I know when we did project-based funding, I felt like if you have a car, we were only supporting the door. And so even when we got report back for the money spent, it was just on that, $15,000 grant. I had no idea what was happening to the whole organization. And I remember Kathleen Enright, who, when she ran GEO, she said to me one time, we were at a tree planting in Pittsburgh when they had their conference there, for all of you in Pittsburgh. But she said, we need to know what's happening under the engine. And I said, it just made so much sense. And I feel like with unrestricted funding, the conversations, as John was saying, are so much deeper. And we have a deeper understanding, what is the organization overall dealing with? How are they able to move forward? And we have a lot deeper conversations, both because it's unrestricted, because now we're actually looking at the engine. And two, when it's multi-year, unless we tell them, look, unless you're not doing your work, you're going to get funding the next year. And so we are able to better understand some of the obstacles, because they know unless they're all of a sudden doing something totally different, they will get the funding. And many times, and Shadi, you've shown this slide in your presentations before, one of the biggest reasons why organizations can't do their work is because of us, because we foundations, we change our strategy. So we are a big impediment to them doing their work. And I remember one organization said, look, if you could just be predictable, that's all I want, just be predictable. And when we're not predictable, that creates many times the chaos and the stress that nonprofits are under. And so again, to kind of go back, we do look at their annual report, we see what they're doing, and we often ask them kind of why questions of what are some obstacles. If they didn't do as well they thought they would, well, then what was it that caused that? But not from a punitive way that we would not fund them anymore, from a way so we can understand what obstacles they're facing. Because quite honestly, I'm not fundraising every day. I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like to fundraise during COVID. I don't know what it's like to all of a sudden have a funder. I was expecting 100,000. They said, oh, we're not going to give you 100,000 next year, and I'm scrambling. I don't know what it's like in my role. I did when I was an ED, but not in my role now. And so I'm there to learn from what they're going through.
Thanks for emphasizing the learning stance. That's such a key part of this. John, I imagine, being at a financial institution, you probably have colleagues on your board that are expecting to see some metrics. So how have you navigated that when it comes to sharing the impact of your philanthropy?
Well, I think the statement that everybody on my board and staff know is, yes, we want, an impact is a jargoning word. Our feeling is that word belongs to community. It doesn't belong to us, right? And so we're really careful about how we use language. But no one wants more impact than the community partners that we are fortunate enough to work with, right? So they want to see change in their community way more than we do. And so it's important for us, at least at starting point, to understand that that's there. And then the second point is, I think we have developed and worked with a lot of folks to develop really good dashboards and tools and resources. And we provide that to our grantees to help them if they're trying to do this work. We have a number of different resources to help them become better learners, help them showcase their work. And we get those materials back, but they know, and when we first started doing quote unquote impact giving, we created this dashboard that we felt was really helpful. And we said, hey, we want you, this is a resource for you. You can use this to tell your story. And when they sent it back, it was all like rosy picture. And we were like, there's no way, right? And the reason they did that is that they didn't trust us enough to tell us the true story, that they thought, to Maylee's point, we might be punitive. And when we said and worked with them and developed trust that they could tell us the true story about how these were going, because we wanted to figure out with them how we could be helpful, we started to see all the reds and yellows of what was going on. And then we really became true partners. And ever since then, most of our partners feel like they can kind of talk about the work in a way that they don't have to show us a laser light show. The last thing I would say is, I remember when I first got to TRO, we had a community partner came to us and, well known in the community, and wanted to see this new philanthropy person, because it's like a unicorn, I guess, and when a philanthropy leader comes in. And she brought all of these charts and graphs and said, hey, look at us. Aren't I good? And I was like, shame on us for creating an environment in which she felt that that's what we would view her as valuable. And so I think for us, like, what we want to walk to is to the beats of what they view as impact and change in their community. And we want to provide whatever resources we can to help them do that, and not be in a place where we're on the other side of that, where I think traditional philanthropy has been, unfortunately.
Thank you. We are winding down, but I want to bring in you, Carrie. You've really embraced a range of ways of thinking about this, and you've already alluded to the 20-year study you did about the sabbatical grants. So I don't want to pigeonhole you into only talking about that, but how do you all think about this question of impact at Durfee, and how do you share back with the board on what's working?
Yeah, we take a very long view. I think similar to the question of how risk is defined in philanthropy, I think there's a lot of need to interrogate the word impact, and what does that really mean when people say, oh, but how do you know that you're having an impact? And, I talked about, well, you alluded to the sabbatical program, and we did a 20-year evaluation of our program a few years ago. And, the impact of the sabbatical program, it has an impact on the person who gets the sabbatical. It has an impact on the organization that receives a sabbatical in that year that they prepare, and in the year that happens. We're also, what the report found is that we are having an impact on the culture of nonprofits in Los Angeles County. And that's something that was built over decades. That when we started the program in the late 90s, people looked at nonprofit leaders taking care of themselves as, oh gosh, she must be ready to retire, or he's burning out, or there's a problem with his board. If he needs to take a sabbatical. And now it's at least in LA, and I think in a lot of other areas as well, when a nonprofit leader takes a sabbatical, it's looked at as a favorable thing. Wow, that person has, served well and long, and they know that they need to take a rest, and the organization is strong enough for them to be able to step away. So only by sticking with that program for a really long time, were we able to see that level of impact. And so that's something that I would really ask people to do, is think much more long-term, think much more broadly about not just the impact of your one grant on one organization, but also on the nonprofit ecosystem and how things operate.
I love that. Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're going to be handing it back to Shantius shortly. I would love to hear from all three of you, just a final piece of advice to those who are listening in today and are looking to introduce multi-year unrestricted funding and are looking for ways to make the case or open the door for it within their organizations. What's one piece of advice you would offer? And we'll start with you, Mei-Li, then John, then Carrie.
I mean, I just say, when we change, it's because we've listened to those that we support. Even our grant programs and why they're funded and why they're designed was not me, but listening to those who we serve. And I would just continue to do that. And our board is so sick of hearing from staff all the time. And so it's really our grantee partners, and we make sure that we lift them up. We're not extracting from them. We pay them for their time. They feel like they're contributors, but they really have led the change and the evolution of our foundation.
Yeah, I would be in a similar vein. I mean, just imagine if you asked however many grantees or partners that you have a choice between program funding and general operating admin. It's very rare you're going to find someone on one end. That says something, right? That says something. And so I would say, if you need proof of what community is saying, they're saying that. I would also say that start slowly, right? And as you build your case, test different sections out, and start. You don't have to go all in if you're worried about that. And then, by the way, there's a whole trust-based philanthropy effort that's here to support you. There are peers in this that are trying to work their way through it. I find great value in watching Carrie and Mei-Li do their work and say, oh my God, that's pretty awesome. Let me see that, right? And all of us want to support a better philanthropy and use this network to help you get there. There's lots of really good advice to help you along the way.
Yeah, and I think back to 2020 when everything shut down and nonprofits stepped up. And at that time, a lot of funders that had program restricted grants released the restrictions because it's like, we're funding the in-person after school program at this location. And they realized, the nonprofit is figuring out how to feed the families that the organization serves. And they suddenly needed to pivot and move quickly, and nonprofits did it. I mean, they delivered. And usually, and this was a just a really strong example of how nonprofits have to operate all the time. Circumstance, it's usually not a pandemic, but circumstances change all the time, and nonprofits have to respond. And they need to be able to do it with unrestricted funding so that they can meet the needs of their community, so that they can fulfill their mission. And let's give them the respect that they deserve to be able to do that, because they will deliver.
So well put. Everyone, please join me in thanking and applauding our amazing panelists, May Lee Walker of the Clenille Foundation, John Brothers of the T. Rowe Price Foundation, and Carrie Avery of the Durfee Foundation. We have learned so much from you all. We appreciate your candor, your transparency, your storytelling, your analogies. This has been a really, really insightful discussion, and we so appreciate it. So thanks again, and I am going to hand us back to Shantius. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone. Thank you. I mean, everyone else stick around, but bye-bye to our panelists.
I was just about to say, no, don't leave. Wow, yes, I completely echo the sentiments of gratitude. John, May Lee, Carrie, what a wonderful presentation, what a wonderful conversation. Shadi for shepherding that, just deep gratitude. I know the chat was going off. I know there were quite a few folks that had questions that maybe didn't get answered in full. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Reach out to us if you have any other questions. We're not through quite yet. Of course, we want to recap this whole conversation and the main takeaway points for you. On this question, does unrestricted funding automatically make you trust-based? Hopefully you got a resounding no, it does not automatically make, hopefully you understand that it does not automatically make you trust-based. And that trust-based philanthropy is about so much more than unrestricted funding alone. Of course, we have our practices, but we hope you also understand and take away that it is about the spirit in which you're doing this, and the spirit in which you're building those relationships with your grantee partners, and the way you're carrying this out, being responsive to their needs, and to ways to really reduce their load, reduce the burden that you're putting on them, and to be supportive to what they need to do. And so, yeah, of course, targeted grants designed to really respond to those nonprofit needs can also be trust-based, even if they're not fully restricted. And we heard about that with the sabbatical grants, with wellness grants, with different ways to really support the grantees, understanding that, if you give unrestricted funding, maybe they're not going to spend them on wellness or things like that that can be really helpful to them. And then also, of course, multi-year unrestricted funding. It's just so important. We talked about that multi-year aspect of this, but it just really allows for nonprofits to be able to plan, to innovate, and to advance their mission and vision, and think ahead, and be creative, and be, risky, as we talked about, or, different things like that, to think through things and be innovative in a way that offering those restricted one-year grants doesn't necessarily do. So it's an important practice to really bolster up your nonprofit partners. And then finally, there are ways to be flexible and creative with budget planning to allow for multi-year funding. So hopefully you take these key takeaways and you're continuing to discuss this and learn more about this. But we want to open up that poll again, that closing poll, because we want to hear from you all. Do you have better clarity on how to answer this question? After this discussion, how confident are you that you could answer it in detail, not just a yes or no, but yeah, I know exactly how to answer this question if somebody were to ask me this. So if you could answer that poll for us, we see quite a few people answering it, and I'm glad to see we have most people saying very confident. So that's satisfying to see, very exciting. And then we have a few that are saying somewhat confident, but need more clarity. And that's just an invitation to keep coming back to these sessions, to keep asking questions, to key into the peer exchange, ask questions to, your peers, get more examples, and to keep the momentum going. So let me end this poll and I'll share the results. So you all can see 77% are very confident now. And so very excited to see that. So we are going to transition, but before we do, Again, deep gratitude to you all. Thank you so much for your participation. My colleague is dropping the evaluation in the chat. Please, please, please fill out the evaluation, give us any feedback, anything to help us as we're carrying out the rest of this session, the series, and you'll have another opportunity to fill that out as well if you go into the breakouts. And then the recording and resources will be shared. We have a lot of great resources in the chat. We'll keep those, save those, and compile a list of relevant resources for you all to continue this conversation. But before we hop off, we are going to have breakout discussions, and these are for everybody. Even if you're not a part of a PSO, I'll put back up the slide that has the PSO organizations, the philanthropy serving organizations. And you can jump in, you'll have discussion, you'll learn more about what we're talking about. You'll have a chance to reflect, to hear from your peers. And we'll also have TBP staff in the main room for general conversation, general questions, if you have those as well. So I am going to pause to stop. Oh, also see you at the next session. How do we approach risk and due diligence in trust-based philanthropy? I know we've had a lot of questions around that. We talked about risk. We're excited to dig into that one. And that will be May 31st from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm going to pause to stop the recording.